Why am I making this episode of Planet of the Agents in 108-degree weather outside? Well, there's nothing better than using a real-life example. So, before we get started in today's episode of Planet of the Agents, first of all, thank you, all of you, for joining me on the show. I'm so happy to have you. Wherever you are listening to this show, whether it's a podcast or you're watching it on YouTube, you've got to, of course, make sure that you are subscribed to the show. Tap the little like button, click the little heart, whatever you see on your screen, and click a little bell or download button, whatever it takes for you to get notifications every time I put out a new video all about the wonderful world of being an insurance agent. Okay, so in today's video, what are we going to talk about? Well, we are going to talk about something that I think is super important, and that is the difference between hard to place insurance and hard to quote insurance. And believe me, there is a difference. So, well, let's start with my little real world example here. Right now, like I said, it's 108 degrees outside. Now, I'm going to walk to a certain destination. I'm going to make this show. I'm going to do all of these things. But I'm doing it, well, when it's 108 out. So what does that mean? Well, let's think about this. If it was 80 degrees outside, I would still reach the same destination. I could still make this show for you, right? But because it's hotter, I'm going to have to put in more work, and it's going to be more difficult to reach my goal. Maybe that's to bind a policy, right? It's going to be potentially the same result, but it's going to be a lot harder. So let's dive into today's topic. I really want to talk about this because as things are ever evolving in the world of property and casualty insurance for insurance agents, things are ever changing. Right now we're going through a new time. You could say it's a hard market. I am constantly hearing about carriers. Holy moly. Okay, carriers are pulling out of different locations. Obviously, if you're in Florida and you're looking at property, you really are feeling it. California, you are feeling it too. Wow, brush areas. I mean, it's getting tough. The auto market's really tightening up. Here in Nevada, I've been getting some emails about tightening of the markets. I even got a really enjoyable one from a certain very large carrier about cutting commissions on certain personal lines. Things are not getting so easy. So agents, when you reach out to me, you often talk to me and ask me things like, hey Dave, what are you doing? And what can I do to perhaps not make my life so difficult, make a new plan going forward for what I'm going to do in P&C insurance? And, well, how could you possibly make some money without doing so much work? Well, for those of you who know me, you do know that I've evolved over the years. I used to just love, quoting some simple stuff online, hitting the bind button, earning a little bit of commission, and building up this so-called book with residuals and renewals. Well, renewals are getting harder when the markets are changing. I've seen commercial carriers, particularly the preferred ones or admitted ones, if you will, tightening up. I've seen some are no longer writing certain classes of business, whether it's certain contractors, whether it is manufacturers and importers. Quite a few things have changed in commercial as well. This is the first time in a long time I've seen these changes, by the way. I've seen rates go up and rates change. I actually even saw a few rates go down this year. I was working on a renewal and I saw some rates go down. But what I think is continually available is opportunity in selling hard to place insurance. Now, a lot of that is going to mean surplus lines. Yes, I understand. Many people hate the applications, but have come to accept them as the fact that they are required. There aren't as many online quoting opportunities for obvious reasons. The channel of distribution is different. We wholesalers, are the ones who tend to quote the surplus lines for you. I know there are a few retail agents out there who do have surplus lines licenses. But not all surplus lines need to be hard to quote. But hard to place gives you opportunity. So let's look at some examples. Okay. By the way, if you are watching this on the YouTube channel, which you can find by searching for Planet of the Agents, it often comes up with the logo on the top, and then you can click to go over to the channel. You might be noticing that Las Vegas is actually really pretty, and I like it. So a lot of people just think it's a desert or it's just a bunch of hotels on the strip, but that is not the case. Okay, so here's the deal. Let's talk about this. Hard to place. What does that mean? That means that you don't have a ton of carriers writing it. You probably can't get an instant quote online, but neither can a consumer. A consumer can probably not go online to a website and just get a quote, right? Now that's good for you, because if it's super easy to place, then eventually it will probably go online. Certain industries that I'm shocked are quotable online directly to the insureds. I am shocked, and I have seen some of those slowly come offline because of the magic of claims. But let's look at some examples. If you're thinking about contractors, let's think of one that does not require a lot of data and is not so hard to quote, but is hard to place, meaning, once again, a customer probably can't go online. Just off the top of my head, I think of things like tree trimmers, right? A lot of carriers don't write those, so you can't go to your standard admitted markets, go online and whip up a quick quote. Now, I know there are probably some websites where you can quote those, or a consumer might be able to quote them, but a lot of them go to surplus lines, especially if they want some of the enhancements. There's an example of something that requires very little information to quote. So it's not hard to quote. You just need name, address, probably payroll or gross receipts, depending on the carrier. So that's a very simple example. Another one might be like a swimming pool contractor, if we're talking about contractors. Now, if you don't want to talk about contractors, let's pick something else. Let's talk about a warehouse. Let's say somebody needs to buy general liability for their warehouse. I don't often see that online. I've checked some carriers that have online quoting. And again, that's pretty easy to quote, but not easy to place, which means that you have to represent your customer and go to the surplus lines broker or your favorite wholesaler, and you can request a quote from them. So in that example, it's often quoted on square footage. So what do you need to know? Name, address, and the square footage of the warehouse. That's not hard. But you, as an agent, have an advantage because you can get the quote for a consumer and they cannot just quickly buy it online. This gives you opportunity. Now, let's talk about the other side of the coin. The thing I know that a lot of people don't love. Now, I know some of you out there love to get quotes for things that are really hard to quote, but let's talk about hard to quote. Well, one that I know that has been hard to place and hard to quote, and I hear a lot about, are residential care facilities. So let's talk about something like that. Why is that hard to quote? Well, you have applications that are 5 to 10 pages long. You have a slew of questions that you probably will not have the answers to. You will have to wait for the consumer, or the applicant, if you will, to fill out the application, or you might have to spend a lot of time on the phone with them. You need a ton of information. You probably need loss runs, licensing information. You might need multiple supplementals, okay? So you'll have general liability, professional liability. You might have some form of abuse coverage. You might have a couple other distinct coverages that are specific to that industry, and there's a lot of paperwork. So that, to me, is what I call hard to quote. So what's the difference? Well, let's look at my previous examples again. Aside from name and address, which let's not even count those, right? You needed one additional piece of information in my example of certain contractors or the warehouse. But if you want to quote something like a residential care facility or a laboratory or warehouseman's legal liability, right? You're going to need a lot of information. You're going to have lengthy applications. What a difference, right? It could take you weeks to get a quote. If you're new to this side of the industry, let me tell you, it can take you weeks to get a quote. So let's think about this. Is the premium higher for the harder to quote one? Probably. Maybe, right? Let's go back to maybe. So lately I've been talking to people who say, oh, surplus lines are so frustrating. And I say, well, hold on, there's some advantages, and you might be quoting the wrong types of things. If you're focused on things that are hard to quote, that require lengthy applications, yes, it's going to be harder to quote. It's going to take more time. It's going to be more difficult. And yes, the consumer probably won't be able to buy the insurance online, which is to your advantage because you probably don't want people buying things online because you want to be relevant, right? Okay, so what about the hard to quote stuff? Well, there are some good things about that, such as the premium. But depending on the lifestyle that you want to live, how hard you want to work, what type of business you want to build, you might be wanting to focus more on hard to place insurance. And by finding things that are hard to place, you have a few distinct advantages. Number one, the consumer cannot buy it online. Number two, the customer will probably not reshop it every year because it's much more difficult to reshop it, and they might not be able to find an agent out there to help them because not everyone wants to write this stuff. So what does that mean? Well, here's the deal. I know that some of you think that if your customer is with surplus lines right now, you could move them to an admitted carrier and a quick quote where you could just quote something online and bind it in the following year. Well, that's true for some classes of business. That is not true for all. One class that really catches my interest lately is bounce houses. One of my carriers quotes them. Don't quote me on this, but it's somewhere around a $20,000 minimum premium for a... What's the great part about quoting a $20,000 bounce house rental company? Well, there are two things. One is that there's not that much paperwork or information required, right? So it's very hard to place. And remember what I just said earlier. I know a lot of you have mentioned to me that you try to get your people off of surplus lines, and that's great if you can. It's great, especially if you can get them more coverage. And of course, you want to follow the rules about declinations and such. But what's really interesting is with something like a bounce house or bounce house rental company, that customer is likely to stay in the surplus lines market for a long time. So what are the advantages there? Well, let's think about that. We have that high premium we just discussed, which is, it's enjoyable, right? Makes it a little more fun to quote. But they'll probably be in that market, so they're not going to be shopping it all the time. They're not going to be going online trying to get a quote. So in this example, it's not hard to quote it, but it's hard to place it. And that is what I'm a fan of. I like things that are hard to place but not hard to quote. Because if it was so efficient that someone could just go online and buy whatever they needed, then what would your role be? Sure, your role is consultative, providing guidance, sharing your knowledge. I know so many of you agents out there have so much knowledge about insurance, and I'm so impressed by that. And while your knowledge is super valuable, not everyone appreciates it. And in this modern world, people just want to go online, they want to buy everything that they can, right? And that applies to insurance too. I mean, even in travel, going online isn't always the best deal. There's this story I heard where someone booked a ticket to Birmingham, Alabama instead of Birmingham, England. Is that true? I don't know, but that's a funny story. Maybe going online wasn't the best idea. But the point of this episode and the takeaway here is there's a lot of opportunity out there, no matter what's going on in the market. But you have to quote the things that are right for you. Okay, so I have to make a quick clip in this episode because, well, how do I say it? This is the hottest episode I've ever made. Because it's 108 degrees outside and my camera decided that it was gonna overheat. So hey, well, I think that this episode is super hot. I've got the camera to back me up. So anyway, we're gonna wrap up this episode. Remember what we were talking about. Focus on analyzing what's right for your insurance agency. Are you looking for things that are hard to quote? Are you looking for things that are hard to place? Which one is gonna help you be profitable and sustainable? You wanna make sure that your business is sustainable, that you can retain customers, right? That's what we were all promised when we first got into insurance, that you could have a book of residuals, the book of business. That's what we always talk about. Okay, everybody, before I sign off, make sure that you are subscribed to the show wherever you're watching it or listening to it, whether it's on a podcast or on YouTube. Click the notification bell, click the subscribe button, and of course, click that little heart or thumbs up. You know I love to see that. Make sure you drop a comment below as well, and I will see you all in the next episode. Everybody, take care from planetoftheagents.com.